Hi, my name is Jesse Durham, and today's video is going to be concerning airplanes. Now, if you think that I'm literally talking about airplanes, this show is for you. Also, if you think that that is a metaphor, this show is also for you. So welcome. Let's dive right in. Nelson Nash, in his book, Becoming Your Own Banker, often used the airplane for an example. And it's very, very useful. So following suit, I'm going to use some examples. We're going to talk this through, looking at the infinite banking concept as described in his work, using his own examples. So let's begin by talking about how structure matters on a policy. Okay, again, when I say a policy, what I'm talking about is a whole life policy with a mutual company that's been properly structured for the banking purpose, and that company should be paying a dividend as well. So structure in an airplane obviously matters. Everyone that's flown along with me realizes, understands, and appreciates that. It also matters how a policy is structured. Now, Nash, in his philosophy, I don't even necessarily want to talk too much about his illustrations because he didn't start with illustrations. Nash did not start with the numbers himself. What he would start with is the human problem, the arrival syndrome, the golden rule, Willie Sutton's law, all these different human problem elements first. And that's where we normally start as well. That's not to disregard numbers. That's not to evade or to overlook or to underscore, but rather to acknowledge the main thing, which is who performs the banking function in your life. And if we're using policies that have been structured the way that I'm describing, it matters how that policy is structured from the get-go, because there will be inherent attributes in that policy. Now, I would also say that what we do with that policy matters much more than anything else. Much more than what the economy's doing, what the insurance companies themselves are doing, regardless. What we do with a policy is what's going to matter. Remember, the idea is becoming your own banker. When you're the banker, what you do is what matters most. Sure, we should talk about the vehicle, and we are going to. So, structure. There are different parts to a policy. So, for those that already have a policy, you're a current client, you're going to know this to a degree, of course, yourself. If you're vetting this idea for yourself and you're learning, you're on your learning journey, there is, a base to a policy. There is potentially and obviously perhaps not obviously, but for sure should be mentioned, a paid up additions rider that could be considered. And there are other things as well that go in. There are many things that go into the structure of a policy. And not to go too deep into the water, but how much premium we want to pay, how often we want to pay that premium, for how long. I mean, every policy is going to give you a death benefit. It's going to give you a cash value. There are going to be, structured pieces that allow a certain amount of premium to be paid for a certain number of years. So it merits a lengthy and adequate conversation about your specific needs, both now, regardless of whether you're getting this policy for your household needs for finance or for a small business, big business, investment portfolio, whatever it is that you're already doing to provide for your need for finance and building a system of privatized banking policies. It's necessary to consider all these different elements, so it necessitates an in-depth discussion both on what your specific needs would be now, immediately, but also for the long range, which again ties right back into how Nash would address the subject of becoming your own banker by thinking long range. So there's a base premium, there's a paid up addition, you could have a term rider, splits, what percentage goes to the base premium, what percentage goes to paid up additions rider, how long you attach a paid up additions rider, how much flexibility you give yourself to pay premiums into the future, what are your rights, what are your obligations. These are all parts of the structure. So much like a plane is engineered in a very particular way, we want to structure policies in much the similar way. So Nash would often talk about how airplanes would be structured, engineered so that, for example, and I'm not telling anybody how or not how to fly a plane. It's an example. But on the gauge, let's say it was airspeed. On the gauge, there are going to be these black lines and eventually reach some red lines. And he would talk about, the engineers would structure that plane to actually withstand beyond those red lines. They would overbuild. And here I'm going to be very particular about my vernacular, because out in the financial entertainment world, such phrases such as overbuilding of policies, when talking about cash value policies, you can't. Let's say that you cannot have too much capital. Well, let's see if you would agree with this. You cannot have too much capital. You cannot have too much access to capital. You can't have too long of an access to capital. You can't have too many guarantees about your access to capital. So if we can indeed start with those premises, then we're going to, because I'm covering so many things right here, because what we're buying is a whole life policy. We're paying premiums to the company for life insurance. And yet, and obviously, by reading Nelson Nash's book, we can see that properly structured policies are the most excellent vehicle system entity for privatized banking that exists. So you can't be paying too much. You can't be overfunding any of these other terms. Overfunded insurance. You can't overfund insurance. So, structure matters in airplanes and in policies. There are all these different parts. It merits a quality conversation, perhaps more than one. And planes, the example is that they are overbuilt to be able to accommodate user error, okay? And policies have that same flexibility as well. I mean, a properly structured policy is actually going to give you leeway in a particular way. Right here would be an example, so that you don't do what's called mecking a policy. You don't turn a whole life policy into a modified endowment contract, a MEC, modified endowment contract. You would be able to fund the policy to the amount that you anticipate being able to fund a policy, for how long you anticipate being able to fund a policy, but also have flexibility therein to pay additional premium into your policy that was above and beyond what is merely your obligation to maintain the policy in force, but also without mecking the policy and changing the tax treatment of that policy. Because with policy loans, with it being a loan from the insurance company to access the cash value of your policy, you can do so tax free. We wouldn't want to change that situation in almost every case that I can think of, by turning that policy into a modified endowment contract. So obviously the actuaries, when they're collecting all the data and processing all the data that has allowed these companies to be able to function and exist and grow and even pay dividends to policyholders, to the policyholders of these mutual companies, year after year, decade after decade, for over 100 consecutive years. Obviously, the actuaries are contributing to the robust nature of these policies in their flexibility, but in the guarantees, obviously, in what these policies can do and how they can be used. So essentially what I'm saying is they are overbuilding in this way. The policy, for the policy owner. It has a lot of flexibility, but it comes with guarantees. And what I'm describing is reflected in that these mutual companies have provided a dividend to policyholders, because what a dividend is a return that is realized based off of the general overall performance of the company. So it means that these insurance companies have been able to meet the death benefit payout requirements while providing the guaranteed growth in the unilateral contract in the whole life policy, and even yet provide a dividend from the general performance above and beyond all of those things. So much like a plane is overbuilt for user error, etc. And on that point, I would say I've probably made every mistake that you possibly can make in practicing becoming my own banker. You know, from the time that I first picked up Nash's book in 2015 till now, I've probably made every mistake that's possible. May not be done making my mistakes. And yet, it just gets better and better over time. So that leads me to a next point, is that the efficiency of both an airplane and a whole life policy that's been properly structured will get better, and just like Nash said, no matter what. See, I've got policies now that have reached their second year, their fifth year, their sixth year. So after several years, I've been able to witness firsthand in how I, have owned and controlled and used my policies, our policies, and they have gotten more and more efficient. And the whole time we've been able to enjoy the flexibility that I've been talking about. We have been able to, even while making errors, continue to grow and expand what we've been able to do in capturing our financial footprint and becoming our own banker and getting the snakes and the dragons out of our lives to become our own banker. So if it helps to think of the airplane taking off of the runway in the beginning, it's slow. Now, here I don't want to say that you can't begin immediately wherever you are to become your own banker. I believe that you can. Now, that may not mean that you buy a policy to use as your entity. You may start with a mason jar. I don't know. You may start by cleaning up some bad money habits. You may start by, but here's what I want to say. Just like an airplane starts on the runway slowly, it gets faster and better with time. So in the beginning of a policy, you do see a capitalization phase where there's not a loss of value, but you do experience a loss of liquidity. So you may pay a certain number of dollars in premium and may not be able to access 100% of that in year one, or in year two, or in year three, or in year four. So structure matters there, but the more important point is that you can continue to do what you're already doing without assuming any additional risk, without losing control, without doing anything stupid. And you can start on the path. You can get on the runway, get going to become your own banker. And then obviously over the course of time, you pick up speed, and you would be surprised at how, and we'll talk more about this, but you'll be surprised at how you can just blow by somebody else with what you're doing. And that's going to lead me to talk about something that Nash was really, really good at pointing out in his book. And he would say, he even covers it in talking about the spending pattern, the average, the normal American spending pattern, and how 25% is going here, 40% is going there, 30% is there. And he would get to this 10% savings. And that is a conservative number from that time, the time of the writing of his book, till now. For sure, the average American is not putting away 10% of their earnings towards savings, But let's give the benefit of the doubt. Let's assume that 10% is going. And see, that is where most of the financial entertainers and advisors and whoever would advise us to focus, is talking about getting a better rate of return, a better return on our investment, okay? And they're talking about what would be the 10%, which is not really the 10%, but follow me here. While overlooking the entire cash flow that household or business or investor handles. And instead trying to focus on, well, how do we take that 10% and turn it into 12%, turn it into 20%, while overlooking the much, much bigger picture. And here's what Nash would say. He would say that the airplane doesn't fly in a vacuum. It flies through an environment. So let's say we were going to fly from Birmingham, Alabama, and this is the scenario in his book, from Birmingham, Alabama to Chicago. And let's say, because we're flying through an environment, let's say there's a storm, and there are storms. No matter when you're listening to this audio and video right now, there are always storms. There's always this boom-bust cycle, this up and down. Jim Rohn would talk about the seasons of life, spring, summer, winter, fall seasons, okay? But let's say there's a system in the area, and it's creating a 345 mile per hour headwind. Well, if you've got an airplane that can fly at a whopping 100 miles per hour, but that airplane is trying to leave Birmingham, Alabama to head to Chicago facing a 345 mile per hour headwind, he said you're going to be heading to Miami at 200 plus miles per hour. Because your 100 miles per hour is going to do nothing. It's not going to put a dent. Okay, so your ground speed is, you're going backwards. So you just need to land. Okay, well, what he continues to say is that let's take that 100 mile per hour airplane and let's let that same system move right over top of the airport. So now if the airplane were to take off, it's 100 miles per hour would be moving the airplane on a ground speed of 100 miles per hour because the headwind's behind it and it's in that eye of that storm. It can proceed to move at 100 miles per hour, which is the focus again of what I'm saying the financial entertainers and the gurus want to talk about is how to get, and what if we could get 105 miles per hour out of the airplane? Well, that's okay. I'm not saying we can't have that discussion, but here's what I'm saying. If we will watch and that storm keeps going, what's going to happen, because these systems move clockwise, counterclockwise, circular. This is his analogy from the book. When that system keeps moving and the airplane that can move at 100 miles per hour leaves while it has a 345 mile per hour tailwind, then it's not just clicking along at its 100, it's got a 445 mile per hour ground speed. Now talk about being able to blow by even all the other airplanes that could move at 100, their full 100 miles per hour. They'd be blown by. And this is where Nash would say, okay, now we're talking about the environment. Okay, not just about the airplane itself, but about the environment that it's moving through. It doesn't move through a vacuum. But then he would say, compared to what? See, if we're comparing an IBC airplane against what the conventional route is, which is, work a job and invest in a 401k or just whatever you think of when you talk about that, anything other than practicing the infinite banking concept. And I'm not trying to create an either or scenario. If you control for the banking function in your life, that doesn't mean that you can't invest in an IRA. But what I'm saying is if you don't just focus on the airplane, but you focus on the environment, even if the other airplane is moving at that 100 miles per hour that it can, but you've got that tailwind, okay, on top of your 100, and you're going at 445. There's no comparison. No comparison. You blow the competition out of the water. You could be equal in a small business, equal as a household, equal as an investor in whatever given space. And if one is only trying to improve the ability of, and I'm not saying don't improve the ability of the airplane. We've come a long way from Orville and Wilbur Wright. But what I'm saying, the environment coupled with what we can do with the airplane will blow past what the conventional is. Now, that's a huge point. And here is where Nash would describe that what if the conventional route, because again, remember when we talk about going into a headwind, has that person going to Miami at hundreds of miles per hour while you're going 445 miles per hour this way. Then the difference is even that much more stark, and that's why he would say compared to what? So again, will there be inflation, wars, turbulence, storms, ups, downs, booms, busts? Yes. Who controls the banking function in your life? That's the environment. Sure, there's the airplane. But again, keep doing what you're already doing. And if you look to account for the environment around what it is that you're doing, and you can practice becoming your own banker, again, without assuming any additional risk, with guarantees, without losing control, without working any harder, without changing your cash flows. But you can begin to account for the environment around you, regardless of all these ups and these downs. If you would abstain from abdicating that to someone else, putting it out of your control, then you can use that environment to your benefit. And if you are, and a competitor is not, or any other given example is not, then you will win by default. Because most people want to focus on savings. Most people want to focus on getting out of debt. Well, again, what if you could build your own privatized banking system and have savings? What if you could build your own privatized banking system and get out of debt? See, if you just, and we have information here on the channel just about getting out of debt. I've been on that side of the table, having consumer debt. But again, I wish I knew then what I know now, right? What if you could, instead of just getting out of debt and have those dollars leave your family forever, what if you could build your own privatized banking system and get the money back? Pay off debt and get the money back. So accounting for the banking function doesn't put you at odds with this, that, or the other. Putting a scenario in front of you, well, do I practice becoming my own banker or do I get out of debt? Do I practice becoming my own banker or do I buy this next piece of equipment for my business? Do I practice IBC or do I fill in the blank, pay for a wedding, account for furthered education, college, legacy planning, anything that you want to do. What's recurring expenses, property taxes? What if you could pay your property taxes and get that money back? So it's the infinite banking concept. First word being infinite. Fill in the blank with whatever right there. But in reading Nelson's work and listening to this information, I hope that we are looking at now the environment that we're operating in. See, it's out of my control, these ups and these downs, inflation or deflation, boom or bust, gasoline doing this, housing doing that. But becoming my own banker, that I can control, that you can control. It's all about learning. We must understand. Yes, we must apply some disciplines. And then we reap all the rewards. We're the ones with the ownership. We're the ones with the control. And you can become your own banker. In fact, Nash, when he finished talking about the airplane model, he would say that it's the most profitable thing that you could do over a lifetime. And I'm so glad that he put it that way. And obviously he put it that way. He was the one who would talk about thinking long range. It's the most profitable thing that you can do. There's that part, okay? Taking a look at the environment around what it is that you do as a household, as a business, as an investor, whatever that may look like for you. But over a lifetime, again, you eat an elephant one bite at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day. You see, as an airplane goes, it gets more and more efficient. Now think about this, and here's another point. When an airplane takes off the runway, full tank of fuel, its motors work at X level, correct? So when it takes off from Birmingham, Alabama on its way to Chicago, we've already talked about the environment and how that plays into it. Could have a headwind, or it could have no air system whatsoever affecting its propulsion, or it could have a tailwind that makes it go even faster. What about the fact that when you have properly structured policies, you realize that they become more and more efficient without fail? Can't stop it. As the airplane goes and uses its fuel, it gets lighter and lighter. So that same airplane that was capable of 100 miles per hour with a full tank of fuel can go even faster. So in that way, we are able to address, the airplane itself plus the environment. Again, this is all about bringing banking back to the me and the you level. How big do you want your airplane to be? How long do you want to have the use of your airplane? How many people does your airplane, and that's a metaphor, but how many people does your airplane affect? Because Nash would always talk about, thinking long range, planning long range, acting long range, and acting intergenerationally. How many people do you want on board your plane? I have experiences with traditionally, commercially, conventionally financing vehicles, using credit cards for consumer purposes, having bad debt in that way. I have this kind of a background and experience that, again, makes me appreciate becoming a home banker that much more. But what if my children never have to experience anything outside of our family bank? What if my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, just walk this scenario out with me. Becoming your own banker. How many people do you want on your airplane? How many airplanes can you get? If one is good, two is better. So these are questions to consider for yourself when either vetting this idea of what does it mean to become your own banker, or if you're already a client and you already have your first policy or multiple policies, how can you keep adding scale to what it is that you're already doing? So of course, I hope this has been helpful. I hope that this encouraged you to get back in Nelson's work, Becoming Your Own Banker, in his second book, Building Your Warehouse of Wealth. If you'd like to have a conversation about how this concept could apply to you and your household or business, let me know. Call 828-817-4223 or email durhamtalents@gmail.com. As always, this has been a great pleasure for me. I look forward to our next conversation. Have a great day.